On a snowy night, a woman with a terrified expression was hiding from someone. It turned out she was being hunted by a killer, holding her breath and not daring to make even the slightest sound. She tried calling her husband, but he was on duty at the time and missed her desperate call for help. With no other choice, the woman dialed the emergency hotline. Immediately, an operator began taking notes and asked for her location. The woman replied that she was hiding behind a trash bin. The officer asked her to describe it more specifically. The victim said the bin was green, but in the very next moment her phone signal abruptly cut off. The supervisor immediately ordered the operator to call her back. However, the officer hesitated and worried that calling again might expose the victim's hiding spot. However, her supervisor didn't think much and directly pressed the callback button. At that moment, the phone's ringtone echoed and the killer instantly pinpointed his target. The woman didn't have time to react before the killer attacked and she fell to the ground. Based on the sounds from the other end of the line, the officer guessed the victim's dire situation. The woman lay on the ground and frantically begged for mercy and desperately pleaded that she had young children. Yet the cold-blooded killer blamed her and asked why she went out causing trouble at night. After speaking, he pulled out a black iron ball and brutally murdered the victim. Through the phone, the officer clearly heard the horrific sound as the victim's head was smashed. At the same time, Jin Hyuk had just finished his mission and was drinking with colleagues. He suddenly received a call from another teammate. This person reported that a female body had just been found in an alley and it somewhat resembled Jin Hyuk's wife. At first, he didn't believe it and Jin thought it was just a prank and brushed it off. After a few drinks, he called his wife but no one picked up. A vague fear began to rise in his chest. In a slightly drunken state, Jin Hyuk hurriedly rushed to the crime scene. His colleagues tried hard to stop him and didn't want Jin Hyuk to witness the tragedy, but he still caught sight of a piece of paper. It was a will his wife had left on the ground. Jin Hyuk still couldn't accept truth, so he bent down to check the corpse's wrist and froze. The token of love he had once given his wife was there along with the distorted face when Jin Hyuk lifted the white cloth. This was indeed his wife. In that moment, Jin Hyuk's sanity completely collapsed. He had only one thought left, and that was to take his wife home. The next day, news of the brutal murder of a policeman's wife appeared on the front pages of newspapers. The 112 emergency center faced heavy criticism for the staff's negligence in handling the call. Those involved were immediately sacked. At the funeral, a colleague told Jin Hyuk that the police had found the killer who murdered his wife. It was a security guard named Dong Jun who had a long criminal record. When searching Dong Jun's house, the police discovered blood-stained clothes and items. Test results showed the DNA perfectly matched the victims. Jin Hyuk was both devastated and furious. His colleagues were also determined to make the killer pay a fitting price. However, at the trial the next day, an unexpected event unfolded. The officer from the emergency center firmly stated that she was certain Dong Jun was not the killer. This officer named Kanju possessed an extraordinary auditory ability. Her sensitivity to sound was many times greater than that of an average person. Because of this, Kanju noticed that the killer's voice was completely different from Dong Jun's. The courtroom instantly descended into chaos. Everyone believed Kanju was deliberately distorting the truth to evade responsibility, yet she remained steadfast in her judgment. Kanju asserted that the killer was a man over 30 years old. When the murderer spoke, his lower jaw produced a distinct cracking sound, but Dong Jun showed no such trait. Kanju also revealed that not long before this same killer had murdered her father, she requested the court to replay the police call recording, but strangely, the latter part of the audio had been cut off. This left Kanju unable to prove her claims. The prosecutor warned Kanju to carefully consider the consequences before speaking. The current evidence was overwhelming, and if she cooperated, the case could be swiftly closed. Yet Kanju didn't waver. She resolutely insisted the real killer was someone else. In the end, the suspect Dong Jun was declared not guilty and released. Jin Hyuk witnessed the event and completely lost his composure. He believed Kanju had been bribed, but before he could act, court staff dragged him out. The verdict immediately sparked a fierce wave of controversy. Afterward, Kanju vanished without a trace. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Kanju, after studying abroad, finally returned to the city. She possessed an extraordinary superpower, so remarkable that even the ticking of a clock's needle or the heartbeat of an ant couldn't escape her ears. This time, Kanju returned to the emergency center with a new identity. She would become a criminal investigation expert and was determined to track down the killer from years ago who had murdered her father. In a different development, a girl named Hye Jin agreed to meet a strange man because he promised to give her 100,000 won. Afterward, the two walked through several narrow alleys, and the further they went, the more uneasy Hye Jin felt because the path was eerily deserted. As if guided by a hunch, Hye Jin realized she'd been tricked and firmly demanded to turn back. But But having caught his prey, the man wouldn't let go so easily and suddenly attacked Haejin and covered her mouth and pinned her against the wall. Haejin couldn't resist and immediately slipped into unconsciousness. When she awoke, she frantically pulled out her phone and called the police. However, since she was using a virtual SIM card, pinpointing her GPS location proved difficult. The police could only determine that Haejin was within a 2 kilometers radius of a building starting from number 36 in Oksan Ward. At that moment, the man began ascending the stairs. Haejin struggled to crawl toward the window and picked up a brick and hurled it outside with all her strength. Hearing the noise, he immediately assumed the hostage had jumped from the building and hurriedly chased after her. With the situation urgent, Kanju quickly dispatched Jin Hyuk to the crime scene. As Haejin regained her senses, she vaguely recalled that before passing out, she had seen something colorful but couldn't identify what it was. Using this scant clue, Jin Hyuk swiftly located an iron door covered in advertisements. However, upon entering, he realized it was an abandoned house with no one inside. If they continued searching blindly, the rescue team would be like looking for a grain of sand in a desert. Meanwhile, Haejin noticed the man hadn't returned yet and came up with the idea to escape. But Kanju urgently warned that if Haejin were discovered, the consequences would be dire. Ignoring the warning, Haejin recklessly dashed downstairs. After running just a few steps down the stairs, she spotted the man hurriedly returning. In a panic, Haejin rushed back up to the second floor and hid in a room. But in her haste, she accidentally dropped her phone charm at the corner of the staircase. The man ran up and noticed Haejin had vanished. Without hesitation, he gripped his weapon tightly and his eyes turned ferocious. He then dashed outside again with the weapon in hand. Meanwhile, the police approached a nearby convenience store. The elderly shopkeeper said that behind this alley was an abandoned kindergarten with walls covered in colorful drawings. She added that recently some suspicious characters had been gathering there, and she could tell at a glance they weren't decent people. Upon hearing this, Jin Hyuk immediately raced to that location. However, Kanju offered a different assessment based on the police call. She heard a faint buzzing sound on the phone, the distinctive noise of an LED billboard. A desolate place like an abandoned kindergarten wouldn't have such a light. Still, Jin Hyuk trusted his instincts more. He kicked open the door and stormed into the kindergarten. Upon closer inspection, it was clear this wasn't the crime scene. At that moment, the killer was armed with his weapon. He repeatedly tapped the railing as he climbed the stairs. Hearing the sound, Kanju quickly recognized it as the noise of a stone hammer. It was a tool typically used to slaughter animals. She immediately recalled a murder case in Seoul. A month ago, the victim had been beaten until their face was unrecognizable. The weapon used was exactly this type of hammer. But why would that killer appear here now? This pointed to one thing. Either the police had arrested the wrong person in the previous case, or the murderer had escaped. Kanju immediately reported the news to the leader of the major crimes unit, Jong Kyung-ha. He didn't believe her and thought she was talking nonsense. However, just a few seconds later, new investigation details forced him to eat his words. The suspect arrested earlier actually had an alibi. Because of that, he had been released. At this point, the police realized this wasn't a simple kidnapping. The person behind it was very likely the serial killer still on the loose. Meanwhile, the killer had found the phone charm dropped on the stairs. Haejin sensed something bad. She slowly lifted her head. Sure enough, his terrifying face appeared. Without giving Haejin a chance to resist, he dragged her into the bathroom. Haejin's blood-curdling scream echoed through the emergency center. At that moment, the killer opened his tool bag. He carefully selected the right murder weapon. Meanwhile, Jin Hyuk was still busy searching for the colorful object Haejin had mentioned. The critical moment was drawing near. Kanju thought of a hair salon on the map. She deduced that the buzzing sound on the phone was the noise from this salon's advertising light. Also, LED lights often have multiple colors matching Haejin's earlier description. Kanju immediately shared her theory with Jin Hyuk. He remained skeptical, but then he recalled passing by a hair salon. Realizing this could be a vital clue, Jin Hyuk hurriedly raced to the salon with urgent steps. At that instant, the killer raised the hammer high. He swung it down with full force, but luckily Haejin dodged the blow in time. This drove the killer into a frenzy. He grabbed her collar and slapped her face repeatedly with stinging force. Then he seized her hair and yanked her head up to deliver a ruthless strike. Just as the hammer swung upward, Jin Hyuk burst in. He intercepted the killer's move. A fierce struggle broke out instantly. Jin Hyuk wrestled the killer to the ground and hurled him into the bathtub. He punched down hard into the water. Soon the water turned red with blood. At first, Jin Hyuk intended to spare his life, but as he turned, his gaze fell on the killer's bag. It was stuffed with women's belongings. The image of his wife murdered 3 years ago flashed before him. Instantly, rage erupted within Jin Hyuk. He couldn't let a deranged killer continue to exist. Jin Hyuk raised the hammer high, intending to deliver a fatal blow to send the killer off. But Kanju intervened just in time. time, using every word she could muster to persuade him to stop. In the end, Jin Hyuk's reason triumphed over his rage. At the same moment, the police team stormed the scene, rescuing the victim. Afterward, Jin Hyuk picked up the phone that had fallen to the ground. It suddenly dawned on him that Kanju had relied solely on sound to accurately pinpoint the location and help solve case. Did she truly possess hearing abilities far beyond those of an ordinary person? If so, could the culprit who killed his wife 3 years ago actually be someone else? Just as he wanted to press her for answers, the emergency center received a call about another case. A 7-year-old boy named Son Aram called. He frantically reported that his mother wanted to kill him. At first, the police thought it was just a childish prank, but through his rapid breathing, Kanju realized Son Aram wasn't joking. Not only that, Son Aram was severely injured and at risk of dying any moment. It turned out Son Aram had been stabbed in the stomach by his mother with a knife just because he didn't obey her. Despite the pain, Son Aram managed to grab the phone. He quickly hid inside the washing machine on the balcony, then called the police. Hearing the boy's faint breathing, Kanju immediately recognized the critical situation and swiftly activated a red alert. At the same time, she instructed Jin Hyuk to head straight to the scene. Meanwhile, Son Aram's mother Bok-soon was wielding a knife and searching the apartment for her son. Meanwhile, Son Aram was losing a lot of blood due to his severe injury. The blood flowed down the washing machine's drain pipe. Kanju instructed the boy to press his hand firmly against the wound. She calmed him and urged him to try recalling his exact address. Son Aram could only describe it vaguely. He said he was hiding in a white washing machine on the balcony. Unable to get precise information, Kanju shifted her approach. She asked the boy to describe what he usually saw when looking out the window. Son Aram said there were red brick buildings outside. Based on this clue, Kanju immediately ordered her team to scan signals around areas with many red brick buildings. Not long after, they pinpointed a villa complex named Sungwon. Meanwhile, Bok-soon frantically called a man and reported that Son Aram had escaped. The police quickly arrived at the identified area, but the place had too many buildings, making the search difficult. To narrow it down, Jin Hyuk and his team decided to visit the security office for information. At the same time, a neighbor mentioned that if it involved child abuse, it was likely house number 104 in building 5. She also noted she'd just seen that house throw out trash, including a bag of blood-stained clothes. Hearing this, Jin Hyuk rushed to the apartment. He heard a child's cries echoing from inside. Without hesitation, Jin Hyuk and his team broke down the door and stormed in. But upon closer inspection, they found only a mother feeding her child. The case hit a dead end. At that moment, Son Aram provided another detail. He said whenever his father came home, a harmonica sound would echo through the house. Kanju tried to figure it out but couldn't pinpoint what it meant. Meanwhile, Bok-soon stepped onto the balcony. Son Aram's fear and anger was still dripping steadily from the washing machine's drain pipe. Noticing something odd, Bok-soon flung open the lid. Her cold face leaned in close, and her eyes glared as if she wanted to devour Son Aram. She reached in and yanked the boy out. Though Son Aram struggled with all his might, a child's strength couldn't match an adult's. The entire emergency center heard the boy's desperate screams. Jin Hyuk panicked and urged Kanju to find a solution immediately. However, she still couldn't come up with an effective plan. Kanju could only try talking to Bok-soon for now. Soon after, the police located the boy's apartment, but when they burst in, they found only the mother slumped on the floor. Bok-soon's eyes were vacant, and she didn't utter a word. After some persuasion, Kanju finally got the mother to speak, but the information Bok-soon revealed sent chills through everyone. Son Aram had been taken away by an old man. That old man was a brutal figure who often abused children. Bok-soon also confessed she had raised many children, but all of them were tortured to death by the old man. Upon hearing this, Jin Hyuk rushed to the security office for help. He asked the guard if he'd seen an elderly person take a child through here. The guard stayed calm and told Jin Hyuk not to rush. He suggested finishing a bottle of water first, then searching together. Without suspicion, Jin Hyuk took the water and drank it. Right after that, the guard led Jin Hyuk to the basement of the complex. But as they descended, Jin Hyuk suddenly felt dizzy. His vision went black and he collapsed to the ground. Only then did the guard pull out a syringe filled with poison. He revealed his true nature. It turned out he was the mastermind behind all the crimes, a depraved man who specialized in abusing and killing children. His name was Chul Han. He calmly admitted to killing dozens of children, not just to satisfy his twisted desires, but also to collect insurance money after their deaths. At first, he planned to inject poison to finish Jin Hyuk off right there. But unexpectedly, at the critical moment, Jin Hyuk sprang up and grabbed Chul Han's wrist tightly. Jin Hyuk coolly pulled a phone from his pocket. It had recorded every word of the old man's wicked confession. It was all a trap set by Jin Hyuk. When he took the water bottle, he quickly spotted a discarded sedative vial in the trash. Sensing something something off. He pretended to drink, then secretly spat it all out. Then Jin Hyuk seized the opportunity to overpower the old man. The most urgent task now was finding Son Aram's whereabouts. Jin Hyuk immediately connected his walkie-talkie to the center. As soon as the signal came through, Kanju asked him to raise the device high. Relying on the faintest sounds transmitted, she began deducing the boy's location. Earlier, Kanju had told Son Aram not to give up but to persistently tap his fingers on nearby objects to create noise. Thanks to this, she could pinpoint the direction accurately. Under her guidance, Jin Hyuk kept moving. He turned left, then right, and finally stopped before a large wall. Kanju insisted that Son Aram was definitely behind it, yet Jin Hyuk felt doubtful since he couldn't hear any sound from the other side. Still, it was the only hope left. Jin Hyuk decided to act. He grabbed the hammer in his hand, then pounded the wall repeatedly until a large hole broke through. When his flashlight shone inside, he finally saw Son Aram. The boy was trapped in an iron cage and still faintly tapping his fingers on the metal bars. Thanks to the persistence of both sides, Son Aram was safely rescued. As for the wicked old man, he was arrested and sentenced to life in prison, ending his horrific string of crimes. It seemed the case had concluded here, but the truth behind the crimes was only now beginning to unravel. 3 years earlier, a man unable to sleep wandered aimlessly. He carried a heavy iron ball and searched for his next victim. Soon after, he struck and attacked a woman right on the street. That scene was accidentally witnessed by a passing police officer. Immediately, the officer gave chase to the suspect. Unfortunately, due to his advanced age and waning stamina, the policeman gradually fell behind and let the culprit escape. During the pursuit, the officer accidentally bumped into a man in a suit. He intended to apologize, but suddenly noticed the man's hands were covered in blood. Sensing something was wrong, the officer began to question him. But before he could act, the man struck first and wrestled the policeman to the ground. However, the police officer wasn't weak. He swiftly twisted his body and used his strength to flip the opponent over, then pinned the suspect down. It seemed he had subdued him, but unexpectedly the stranger lashed out with his foot. He kicked the officer hard and sent him reeling backward. At that moment, the officer was still on a call with his daughter Kanju, who was at the emergency center. Every sound from the scene reached her ears directly. Unable to do anything but listen, Kanju was horrified to realize the killer had grabbed her father's collar. He coldly raised the iron ball in his hand. Then with terrifying force he slammed it down. A heavy thud echoed. The officer collapsed to the ground in agony. Yet the killer didn't stop there. He kept delivering brutal blows without hesitation. Through the walkie-talkie, Kanju heard every moment of her father being tortured to death. The sound of police sirens gradually grew louder in the distance. But what was even more terrifying was that the murderer didn't seem to act alone. He picked up the walkie-talkie and taunted the other side with a mocking tone. Kanju listened closely and noticed something odd in his speech. His voice was slightly slurred, and his lower jaw made a strange cracking sound. These details became the only clues in the series of murders. At her father's funeral, Kanju happened to watch the news and learned that the police had caught a suspect in the case. During the investigation, they found clothes and belongings of the victims at the suspect's house. He was also the suspect in the murder of Jin Hyuk's wife. However, as soon as Kanju heard his voice, she immediately sensed something off. This man's voice was completely different from the real killer she'd heard over the walkie-talkie. In court, despite seemingly clear evidence, Kanju firmly insisted that the arrested suspect was not the true murderer. Though her argument sparked much debate in the end, due to gaps in the evidence, the suspect Dong-jun was declared not guilty and released. This ruling infuriated the victims' families, especially Jin Hyuk. Most people believed Kanju had been bribed by Dong-jun to help him escape justice. After the trial ended, Police Chief Jong Kyung sternly warned Kanju. This made her realize the real killer's identity was far from simple. It seemed the entire police system was trying to cover for the mastermind. Unwilling to accept this false reality, Kanju went abroad to study and later returned to the emergency center. With her extraordinary hearing, she repeatedly aided the police in solving cases. Yet Jin Hyuk still didn't fully trust Kanju after that trial years ago. Then one day, a group of youths were gathered, eating under a bridge, when a body fell from above. Terrified, they immediately called emergency services. When the police identified the victim, they discovered it was Dong-jun, the man declared not guilty 3 years earlier. Jin Hyuk and Kanju rushed to the scene. After a thorough inspection, they realized Dong-jun hadn't fallen by accident, but had been brutally murdered. The wound on his head clearly showed the perpetrator had used an iron ball to smash his skull, just like how Kanju's father had been killed. Determined to uncover the truth, Kanju sought out the best forensic doctor in the field and asked for a detailed analysis of the body. With vast experience, the coroner could tell at a glance that Dong-jun had died from torture. Based on the traces left behind, mind. The coroner deduced that before dying, Dongjun had been dragged away barefoot over sharp glass shards scattered on the ground. Then each of his toes was savagely crushed by the killer with a hammer. Not stopping there, the murderer went on to smash Dongjun's head with an iron ball before coldly kicking the victim's body off a height. What stood out was that this torture method bore striking similarities to the cases 3 years ago involving Kwanju's father and Jin Hyuk's wife. This convinced Jin Hyuk that the real serial killer was still out there. Learning this truth left Jin Hyuk utterly broken. Late that night, he went to a small eatery to drown his sorrows in alcohol. The owner's niece named Eunbae tried to comfort the man sinking in grief. The next day, while heading home from work, Eunbae accidentally kicked something. When she bent down to check, she found it was a recently released designer handbag. Her older sister Eunsu warned her not to touch strange objects, but since no one was around, Eunbae couldn't resist her curiosity and unzipped the bag. Inside, she found a small USB drive, along with a message that read, "I know about your dirty deed yesterday, you bitch." Before she could process it, a figure in black suddenly rushed forward. He overpowered and abducted Eunbae. On the other end of the phone, her sister Eunsu heard her cries for help. Immediately, Eunsu called the emergency center for assistance. At that moment, Eunbae was tightly bound and locked in the car trunk. She struggled desperately to break free. She struggled with all her strength to pull out her phone, then pressed the answer button. But with her mouth gagged, Eunbae couldn't make any sound beyond muffled groans. The phone's GPS showed the car carrying Eunbae moving from a road near the train station toward Jamsil. Jin Hyuk and Dae-shik immediately set off in pursuit. However, due to heavy traffic, they couldn't pinpoint the exact vehicle of the kidnapper. They relied solely on the sounds coming from Eunbae. Kwanju deduced Eunbae was trapped in a sealed container. This led the two to focus on vehicles with large trunks like pickup trucks or sedans. In desperation, Eunbae mustered all her strength. She repeatedly kicked the trunk walls to draw attention. Thanks to this, Jin Hyuk noticed a pickup truck with its rear hatch slightly ajar. They sped up and blocked the vehicle. Jin Hyuk ordered the driver to stop for investigation, but the kidnapper suddenly floored the gas and charged forward. Jin Hyuk and Dae-shik were thrown off the road during the chase. It didn't end there. Their car was unfortunately struck by a large truck, causing a serious accident. Luckily, no one was gravely injured. At the police station, Eunbae's grandmother arrived in a panic. She pleaded with Jin Hyuk to save her granddaughter. Accompanying her was Jang Ki-hyun, Eunbae's new boyfriend. According to the initial investigation, the police concluded that Eunbae's ex-boyfriend Kim Joo-hyun was the most suspicious figure, making him the prime suspect in this kidnapping case. Kim Joo-hyun harbored a deep grudge and had once vowed to track down Eunbae for revenge. However, Jin Hyuk had a different perspective. From what he observed, the driver of the pickup truck was a heavy-set man, while Eunbae's ex-boyfriend had a lean build. Clearly, they couldn't be the same person. Despite this, the task force still decided to focus all their efforts on hunting down Kim Joo-hyun. When they opened his car door, a chilling scene unfolded. Kim Joo-hyun was already dead inside, having been there for some time. Meanwhile, Kwanju patiently listened to the recording of the conversation with Eunbae. Thanks to her keen hearing, she detected a faint metallic sound in the audio. After careful analysis, she determined it was the sound of an iron shovel. Suspicion immediately shifted to Eunbae's current boyfriend, Jang Ki-hyun. He claimed to be a teacher, but his shoe soles were covered in mud, which didn't align with his job. Kwanju quickly left a note for Joo-hyun, asking him to investigate Jang Ki-hyun's social media accounts. At the same time, she called Jang Ki-hyun, pretending to ask him to send some items to Eunbae's grandmother. When Jang Ki-hyun arrived, Kwanju brought 2 large cardboard boxes, intending for him to open his car trunk. Though there was no iron shovel inside, it contained a large amount of mud. This further solidified Kwanju's suspicions. Just as she turned to leave and call for backup, the walkie-talkie crackled with Joo-hyun's voice. Following her orders, he had hacked into Jang Ki-hyun's SNS account and discovered numerous photos taken at abandoned lots. He immediately warned Kwanju that Jang Ki-hyun was the one who kidnapped Eunbae. Realizing he could no longer hide, Jang Ki-hyun swiftly drew a dagger and pressed it against Kwanju's throat. At the same time, he removed his dental brace with one hand, causing his lower jaw to emit a strange crack sound. Kwanju froze in shock because this was the signature sound of a serial killer who specialized in using a metal wrench to attack his victims. Staying composed, Kwanju reacted swiftly. She spun around, delivering a powerful kick that sent Jang Ki-hyun reeling backward, then immediately drew her gun, aiming it straight at him. However, just as Kwanju was about to call for backup, a fat man suddenly emerged from behind, swinging a baseball bat and striking her hard on the head, knocking her unconscious. While monitoring a website, they dug a deep pit in a deserted suburban area, intending to bury the officer alive. Before fleeing the country, Jang Ki-hyun looked at Kwanju coldly, asking if she she had any last words. In response, Kanju only smirked mockingly and spat contemptuous words, calling them trash. Without hesitation, the two ruthless men threw Kanju into the pit and quickly began shoveling dirt to cover it. Not far away, Jin Hyuk had tracked the phone's GPS signal and arrived at the scene in time. Seeing the situation unfold, he immediately drew his gun, aiming it at the fat man. However, at that moment, his walkie-talkie crackled with a message from headquarters. Hearing the sound, the two kidnappers panicked and fled. Jin Hyuk tightened his grip on the trigger, but only managed to hit the taillight of the speeding car. Knowing he couldn't pursue them, he rushed to the pit to save his teammate first. In the end, team leader Kanju was rescued alive. Meanwhile, in the dead of night, Yunbei awoke on a strange bed. Opening her eyes, she realized she was in a panoramic filming room. 3 cameras positioned with no blind spots pointed directly at her, sending chills of fear through her body. Soon a man entered the room. Upon closer look, Yunbei was stunned to recognize her new boyfriend, Jang Ki-hyun. He gazed at her, speaking slowly in a persuasive tone, trying to entice her with sweet words. With her beauty and figure, Jang Ki-hyun claimed Yunbei could quickly become an adult film star. The fat man beside him shook his head in dismay. While they were being hunted by police across the city, Jang Ki-hyun calmly wanted to live stream right then. Irritated by his partner's recklessness, the fat man shouted in anger, declaring he no longer wanted to be involved, and demanded Jang Ki-hyun split the money fast. The fat man just wanted his share, so he could return to his hometown immediately, but Jang Ki-hyun clearly had no intention of dividing the cash. His stalling made the fat man lose patience. In a fit of rage, the fat man pulled out a dagger, pressing it against Jang Ki-hyun's throat, demanding the money immediately. However, during the struggle, Jang Ki-hyun suddenly fought back, snatching the knife and stabbing the fat man in return. They wrestled fiercely, toppling the sofa in the room. In an instant, the room fell into an eerie silence. Seizing the moment, Yunbei jumped up in panic and bolted out of the room without hesitation. But before she could escape, Jang Ki-hyun slammed the door shut. He pulled out a chloroform soap cloth he'd prepared earlier, pressing it hard against Yunbei's mouth until she passed out. Then he dragged her down a dark hallway and they vanished into the night. In another development, thanks to some modern techniques, Jin Hyuk and Kanju found the current location of the kidnapping group. According to the data, they were south of a nearby police station. In-soo suddenly recalled that the area once housed a middle school. More importantly, her father had been a teacher there years ago. This meant Jang Ki-hyun hadn't chosen the site randomly. He wanted revenge on his old middle school homeroom teacher. His target was the daughter of that teacher from back then. Jin Hyuk and Kanju immediately rushed to the abandoned school, but upon arrival, the classroom was empty. Only the fat man's corpse remained on the sofa. The two continued their search. Soon after, Kanju heard the sound of a body being dragged, echoing through the silent space. To increase their search efficiency, they decided to split up and act separately. Kanju took charge of the 3rd floor, while Jin Hyuk checked the 4th. Relying on her extraordinary hearing, Kanju detected a faint breathing sound. She quickly traced it and found Yunbei badly injured lying inside an old wardrobe. The moment Yunbei saw Kanju, her eyes widened in terror, staring at her, and just as instinct warned a second later, a dark figure lunged from behind. Flashing back to the past, Jang Ki-hyun's mother was a beautiful woman. With a sick husband and a son to raise, she had no choice but to wear stockings and meet men in the village to sell insurance. Unbeknownst to her, her son silently watched everything. Jang Ki-hyun saw his mother being crudely harassed by the group of men. From then on, he became a target of ridicule among his classmates. As a result, Jang Ki-hyun often fought with them. Though he resented his mother, he understood she did it for the family. One day, Jang Ki-hyun received a camera from his homeroom teacher. He was thrilled, planning to use it to capture school moments. But unexpectedly, when he raised it to take a picture, Jang Ki-hyun accidentally witnessed a humiliating scene. His teacher casually resting his head on his mother's lap right in the classroom. His mother kept complaining about her sick husband, even calling her son a burden. That night, a tragic event unfolded as his mother's room suddenly caught fire. Amid the blazing red flames, she looked at her son standing coldly outside the door, screaming in despair, but he just watched silently with no intention of saving her. In the blink of an eye, 20 years passed. The Jang Ki-hyun of old was now grown. He kidnapped his homeroom teacher's daughter, determined to exact revenge in his own way. Jang Ki-hyun ordered his accomplice to start the cameras, planning to livestream the torture and humiliation of Yunbei. It was his way of compensating past wounds. But before he could act, Jin Hyuk and Kanju burst in. Kanju found Yunbei injured in the wardrobe. Yet a second later, Jang Ki-hyun charged forward, kicking her aside. The two grappled fiercely for over half an hour. At that moment, Jin Hyuk on the lower floor realized the dire situation and rushed upstairs to assist. Jang Ki-hyun now raised a remote control in his hand. It turned out he had rigged explosives throughout the building. building. He was prepared to go down fighting the police. Jin Hyuk immediately raised his gun demanding surrender, but Jang Ki-hyun showed no fear. He hurled a vial of liquid at Jin Hyuk, then turned and ran to the rooftop. On the roof, one held a gun, the other a remote, neither willing to back down. Finally, to ensure the hostage's safety, Jin Hyuk had to compromise by lowering his gun and handing it to Jang Ki-hyun. Though outwardly arrogant when it came to pulling the trigger, Jang Ki-hyun hesitated. Fear flashed in his eyes. Seizing the moment, Jin Hyuk swiftly flipped him to the ground, then landed several punches to his face. Thanks to that, Yunbei was safely rescued, and the task force quickly arrived at the scene. Before being escorted away, Jang Ki-hyun suddenly whispered a few strange words. He said that if he died, his daughter would be left alone. Despite the 500-meter distance between them, those words rang clear in Kanju's ears. They struck her like a bolt of lightning. Those were the exact words her father had uttered before being killed by a serial murderer 3 years ago. Unable to contain her agitation, Kanju frantically rushed to the police car, questioning Jang Ki-hyun about where he had heard that phrase. Though his jaw made the familiar cracking sounds, he clearly wasn't the serial killer from years past. Jang Ki-hyun admitted that on that day, while hunting for prey in an alley, he had unintentionally witnessed another killer using a wrench to attack a police officer. Jang Ki-hyun had immediately raised his camera, recording the entire crime. Only then did Kanju realize the weapon the killer used was a gym weight. Jang Ki-hyun insisted he clearly remembered the perpetrator's face, but just as he was about to reveal the truth, task force leader Jang Kyung-ha suddenly stepped in decisively, shoving the suspect into the car without giving Kanju any chance. Sure enough, Jang Ki-hyun lost his opportunity to disclose the full story. On the way to the station, the police car unexpectedly ran out of gas. At that moment, Jang Ki-hyun lowered his head and spotted the handcuff key dropped in front of him. Not wanting to miss the chance, he discreetly kicked it toward himself, then pretended to complain of stomach pain, needing a bathroom break. The police car pulled into a nearby gas station. An officer escorted Jang Ki-hyun into a public restroom. After checking the handcuffs, the officer stepped outside to wait. Inside, Jang Ki-hyun locked the door, retrieved the key from his pocket, and successfully unlocked cuffs. Meanwhile, the police grew suspicious since the car had a full tank that morning. Hearing this, Jin Hyuk looked under the vehicle and upon closer inspection, discovered the fuel line had been deliberately cut. At the same time, inside the restroom, Jang Ki-hyun climbed toward the window, preparing to escape. But just then, a strange sound echoed from the back of the restroom. Moments later, a man in black suddenly rushed out, grabbing Jang Ki-hyun and slamming him to the ground. Outside, the guarding officer was busy on his phone, completely unaware of the commotion. The mysterious man pulled out a steel wire, tightening it around Jang Ki-hyun's neck. From the women's restroom, Kanju heard someone's rapid heartbeat, sensing extreme danger. By now, Jang Ki-hyun was barely clinging to life. It turned out he had witnessed the serial killer's crime firsthand, and today that killer returned to silence him. Kanju rushed toward the men's restroom, but the door was locked tight from inside. She pounded on it with all her strength, trying to break the lock to no avail. Meanwhile, the killer coldly poured gasoline over Jang Ki-hyun, then dropped a lit match to finish him off. Every move was swift and practiced like a habit. In moments, the acrid stench of burning flesh filled the air, spreading outside. Only now did the police muster their strength to break down the door and charge in, but by then the killer had long vanished. Jang Ki-hyun writhed on the ground, struggling to utter his final words to reveal the culprit. But before he could speak, he took his last breath. Task force leader Jang Kyung-ha, after inspecting the scene, concluded Jang Ki-hyun had set himself on fire. According to Jang Kyung-ha, the man had a penchant for playing with fire, so self-immolation made sense. Kanju didn't argue, but a deep suspicion began forming in her mind. The car key dropping the severed fuel line, the criminal's death, and the killer vanishing into the dark all pointed to a mole within the police. And the most suspicious person now was the task force leader, Jang Kyung-ha. Sure enough, as soon as he returned to the station, Jang Kyung-ha received a mysterious phone call. He said he had completed everything assigned and demanded the other party stop contacting him. Through surveillance footage, Kanju finally identified the mysterious figure who killed Jang Ki-hyun. The man limped, suggesting a past injury to his Achilles tendon or ankle. Even from his gait, it was clear that he was a professional killer. Kanju and Jin Hyuk immediately investigated nightclubs and bars in the area, trying to track down this enigma. After some time, they finally uncovered a lead. Several witnesses recalled seeing a man with a distinctive walk. He shifted his weight onto his heels when stepping, and his lower jaw often made a cracking sound like a habit. According to the bar owner, he had once brought a group of underlings there to hang out. From their conversation, she realized he worked for Jeb Development Company. Right after Kanju and Jin Hyuk left the bar, the killer received intel. He opened his phone, and the message contained the full personal profiles of Kanju and Park Jin Hyuk. Elsewhere, a man stepped into an apartment only to have the landlady splash a bucket of water in his face. He frowned and silently went to the bathroom to wash up. But as he looked up, he flinched. The landlady's face loomed outside the window, staring right at him. The man tried to ignore the oddity and returned to bed, yet the landlady wouldn't let him rest. She began sawing into a cardboard box with a knife, producing shrill noises he couldn't stand. Anger flared. He grabbed a nearby coat rack and slammed it hard against the floor. The moment she sensed him losing control, the landlady downstairs revealed a deeply satisfied expression. It seemed she was deliberately provoking, unable to take it anymore. The man charged downstairs. He held a knife and repeatedly threatened the landlady. He aimed to prove he wasn't someone to mess with. In his agitation, he even slashed his own arm with the knife. Fresh blood gushed out, startling a passing neighbor. She quickly called the police. Officers arrived swiftly at the scene. Jin Hyuk was the first to rush in. He delivered a powerful kick that sent the man crashing to the ground. But upon closer inspection, he realized the man's knife was fake. The blood on his arm was just a prop. The man dropped to his knees crying and confessed he only wanted to scare the landlady, not harm anyone. But the police weren't interested in debating. They firmly escorted him to the station for questioning. The man was genuinely terrified. He bolted into a nearby room. In a panic, he knocked over everything around him to escape. But suddenly, he noticed a pair of eyes staring from the wardrobe. The horror made him scream. Jin Hyuk, doubting, approached and opened the wardrobe door. Instantly, a body wrapped tightly in plastic film tumbled out. When they turned it over, they were stunned to see the victim's face was identical to the landlady outside. The room fell into an eerie silence. Everyone was frozen by the sight. Jin Hyuk immediately shouted questions at the woman before him. She showed clear panic and started babbling incoherently. At the same time, Kanju at the emergency center listened to her voice. Through the comms device, she didn't detect anything unusual. However, when Kanju checked the records, she found the landlady had undergone thyroid cancer surgery. In theory, she shouldn't be able to speak normally. Yet this woman's voice was perfectly clear. This contradiction raised the police's suspicions. Jin Hyuk bent down to examine the corpse's throat. He found a distinct surgical scar. In contrast, the landlady's neck only had a burn scar completely different. This proved the woman before them was an imposter. Further searching the room, they discovered an object matching the victim's fatal wound. It was a heavy coat rack. Jin Hyuk quickly realized an elderly woman couldn't possibly lift it to kill someone. That meant the killer didn't act alone. There had to be an accomplice. Jin Hyuk rushed out of the room. At that moment, a figure darted past. Nearby residents shouted that the fleeing person was the tenant of room 205. In a hurry, Jin Hyuk gave chase. Finally, he found a trembling man hiding behind an old discarded sofa. After investigation, the police identified him. The runaway was Son Aram, a man with the mental capacity of a 3-year-old. The fake landlady was his sister named Jin Hyuk. The murder weapon was confirmed to be an object weighing over 50 kilograms. Only Son Aram had the strength to lift it, yet he kept shaking his head and refused to say anything. But when the police mentioned the words real estate, Son Aram's emotions turned extreme. He began frantically banging his head against the wall. The police concluded that they had planned the murder to seize the landlady's property. That's why Jin Hyuk even underwent plastic surgery to resemble her more closely. However, Jin Hyuk grew suspicious. He noticed that when they arrested Son Aram, his right hand trembled constantly as if it had no strength. Kanju immediately checked Son Aram's medical records. She discovered that 2 months ago, he'd been in a fight that fractured his right hand. Currently, his hand was still recovering and couldn't exert much force. This meant the landlady couldn't have been killed by these two. Yet in the interrogation room, Jin Hyuk stubbornly confessed. She insisted she alone committed the murder with no one else involved. Kanju naturally didn't believe her. She patiently urged Jin Hyuk to tell the truth. Under intense pressure, Jin Hyuk broke down in tears. Finally, she admitted she could reveal the truth, but only if the police guaranteed Son Aram's safety. It turned out the case wasn't as straightforward as they thought. Jin Hyuk recounted that, out of hunger, her brother had picked up glass shards and put them in his mouth to eat. The landlady panicked and tried to stop, repeatedly urging Son Aram to spit them out. Eventually, he complied. But for some reason that night, Son Aram returned home, drenched in blood and in a frenzy. He cried and said he'd accidentally killed someone. Jin Hyuk was shocked. She abandoned her cold noodle stall and raced home like a madwoman. But when she arrived, a group of highly professional-looking people were already there, expertly handling the scene. At that moment, Jin Hyuk realized her naive brother had been used. The real killer wasn't Son Aram, but someone else. Those strangers dragged Jin Hyuk into a dark room. Inside, it was set up like a surgical suite. The lead doctor glanced at a photo in his hand, then flashed a sinister smile. Not long after Jin Hyuk was transformed into the landlady, the ruthless group gave her one simple task. She had to impersonate the landlady, then find a way to evict all the tenants and sell the building to a development company at a low price. If Ji-hye refused, they'd send her foolish brother to prison. To quickly drive out the tenants, she pretended to be a ghost and splashed water on people to intimidate them. Unexpectedly, this enraged one man who caused a scene and even called police. Because of this, the police discovered the landlady's body in the wardrobe. Ji-hye's plan fell apart instantly. She also learned a critical piece of information. The killer was using a blonde man to eliminate a police officer. Hearing this, Kanju grew uneasy. That morning, Jin Hyuk had told her he was going to meet someone named Crazy Dog. Coincidentally, this person also had blonde hair. Sure enough, as the car entered a quiet alley, Crazy Dog made an excuse to use the bathroom and slipped away. Kanju hurriedly called Jin Hyuk. At that moment, a container truck suddenly appeared behind Jin Hyuk's car. He was focused on the rear and didn't notice a dump truck speeding toward him from the front. Through the phone, Kanju clearly heard the sound of a violent crash. Then a group of gangsters, armed with iron bats, rushed in. They furiously smashed the car's windows. But Jin Hyuk was a seasoned cop. Taking down 10 thugs alone was no issue for him. What he didn't expect was that there were 11 of them. A heavy blow to his head knocked him out cold on the spot. At the emergency center, Kanju quickly dispatched backup, but the gangsters had tossed Jin Hyuk's phone SIM card. This left Hyunho unable to pinpoint his exact location. Right now, Jin Hyuk was dangling in a slaughterhouse. Soon he'd be carved into chunks and mixed with goat meat for market distribution. Kanju closed her eyes and tried to recall every detail from the recent call. Amid the chaotic noise, she picked up the sound of an ad from a karaoke lounge. She also recalled the strong spice smell Ji had mentioned. From this, she deduced Jin Hyuk might be held in a goat meat processing plant near the karaoke area. Without hesitation, Kanju relayed this clue to the major crimes unit. A team of officers promptly headed to the scene. Meanwhile, Nam Sang-tae, the crime ring's leader, approached Jin Hyuk. He casually admitted he was the one behind the series of Iron Ball murders 3 years ago. Facing the enemy who killed his wife, Jin Hyuk couldn't hide his rage. He vowed to make Nam Sang-tae pay. However, Nam Sang-tae just sneered at the threat. Then he ordered his henchmen to prepare to strike. Yet, like many villains, he was too arrogant and made a fatal mistake. While he was busy talking, Jin Hyuk seized the chance to counterattack. With swift reflexes, he shoved Nam Sang-tae against the wall, then stabbed his arm multiple times. Nam Sang-tae struggled fiercely and managed to break free and flee outside. At that moment, the police surrounded the area and rounded up all his lackeys. Seeing Nam Sang-tae's incompetence, the true mastermind finally stepped out of the shadows, named Motu. In another development, the police received a late-night emergency call. A woman who just had plastic surgery was killed by an iron ball. After the brutal murder, the killer used the victim's phone to call the police. Soon after Kanju, Jin Hyuk, and Dae-shik arrived at the scene, the house was already empty. They found a large pool of blood on the floor. Following the trail, they eventually discovered the victim's body nailed to a wardrobe. The victim was none other than Ji-hye. Through Kanju's observation, she noted the head wound matched the one on the male victim who fell from a height 3 years ago. Before leaving, the killer left behind a few written words and a piece of mirror. It was a message directed at Kanju and Jin Hyuk. They would be the killer's next targets. Though the forensics team thoroughly examined the scene, they still couldn't uncover any further clues about the murderer. Meanwhile, Motu was lounging in a bath, relaxing after satisfying his twisted urges. His father, Mogi Baeom, however, was stressed. He had to deal with the mess caused by his subordinate Nam Sang-tae. Ever since Nam Sang-tae became a wanted man, the reputation of Mogi Baeom's company plummeted. To resolve the issue, he prepared a large sum of money for Nam Sang-tae. This would let him flee overseas and escape the uproar. But Nam Sang-tae knew that leaving the country meant Mogi Baeom would have him eliminated. So he begged Mogi Baeom for a chance to redeem himself. Given just 3 days, Nam Sang-tae promised to take out Jin Hyuk. In truth, he knew he couldn't defeat Jin Hyuk himself. So Nam Sang-tae hired another assassin and ordered him to kill Jin Hyuk's son. Soon after, the assassin appeared in the boy's hospital room. He slowly approached as the child froze in terror. Meanwhile, Jin Hyuk clearly heard his son's panic cries, but the boy was alone in the room. Jin Hyuk quickly called the nurse to report the situation. Within moments, 3 or 4 guards rushed in to intervene. Yet this assassin was highly skilled. He effortlessly took them down and escaped. At the critical moment, Jin Hyuk blocked the assassin's escape route with his car. The two then clashed in a fierce battle. Elsewhere, Mogi Baeom was discussing business with his partners. Meanwhile, Nam Sang-tae called Motu. He wasn't satisfied with the money given. With what he'd already received, he still wanted to use Motu to score another payout. So the two arranged to meet at the back door of a club to talk. But just then, the bar owner happened to pass by. She overheard the exchange between the two killers. Recognizing Nam Sang-tae as a dangerous murderer, she immediately called Kanju at the emergency center. Yet the call didn't last long. She noticed Motu standing right outside the door. It seemed he'd eavesdropped on the entire conversation. By the time Kanju arrived, all she found were streaks of blood trailing across the floor. In the corner of the room, an eye was pierced by a fork. Not only that, but at the crime scene, the killer deliberately left the victim's phone with a short message. Seeing this, Kanju instantly recognized it as the hallmark of the serial killer. She quickly reported the situation to headquarters, but just as she finished speaking, a chilling laugh echoed behind her. A casual voice spoke up. Motu mocked the bar owner's recklessness for daring to report him to the police. That's why she'd been brutally murdered. When the police arrived, the sight before them was horrifying. The killer stood there calmly, stifling a mocking laugh. At that moment, Kanju slowly turned around. She steadily approached the door. After committing the crime, the culprits calmly went to the bathroom to wash their hands, erasing all traces. They casually returned to the VIP room as if nothing had happened. Since the guests in this room were top Korean tycoons, bodyguards quickly intervened. They blocked the police from approaching to investigate. As a result, all leads in the murder case were swiftly severed. Even the surveillance cameras had been adjusted to avoid capturing the powerful figures. Yet their actions were like beasts in human guise. The club's security guards acted with extreme arrogance. They refused to provide the identities of the VIP clients. Meanwhile, the ruthless enemy returned home. He carefully laid out the hair of the victim he'd just killed. Motu placed the body in a glass cabinet and spoke to the corpse daily as if it were still alive. Elsewhere, Namsante was furious to the point of madness. He knew this murder would surely be pinned on him, so he immediately took his henchmen to a private dock, planning to hide out in the Pacific Ocean for a few days. But as soon as they entered, his men found the fishing boat's owner handcuffed tightly to a chair. It turned out the police had set an ambush waiting for him to walk into the trap. Unfortunately, during the chase, a stray dog suddenly darted out, blocking Jin Hyuk's path. This gave Nam Sang-tae a chance to escape. Still, the effort wasn't entirely in vain. During the pursuit, Jin Hyuk picked up a bag the suspect had dropped. Inside were crucial pieces of evidence and significant financial transactions, highly valuable to the police investigation. At the same time, the command center received news of another serious incident. A man was threatening others with a knife in a bar, causing chaos. When they checked a video posted by a witness, the police were shocked to see the man with the knife was none other than Hyun Ho, a member of the emergency center. Kanju quickly analyzed the situation and concluded Hyun Ho must have been pushed to his breaking point to act this way. Without hesitation, she immediately alerted Jin Hyuk and Dae Shik to head to the scene. Meanwhile, Hyun Ho remained in a highly unstable state. Earlier, he had drunk a glass of water handed to him by a stranger. Soon after, he felt unwell with severe stomach cramps and dizziness. His vision blurred, making it hard to see clearly. Right then, a woman in red high heels and black fishnet stockings walked in. With just one glance at her, Hyun Ho felt so nauseous he nearly couldn't hold it in. A second later, he suddenly swung his knife, grabbed a girl as a hostage, and rambled incoherently. The bar owner saw the tense situation and immediately called the police. When the video hit the internet, everyone at the emergency center was stunned. The person threatening others with a knife was their own colleague, Hyun Ho. Soon after police arrived at the scene, Hyun Ho gripped the knife tightly, refusing to let anyone approach. In his panic, he kept repeating the phrase, "high color laser." Jin Hyuk instantly realized this might be a coded message Hyun Ho was trying to convey. Kanju quickly searched the phrase online, but found no relevant information. Then Unsu recalled that Hyun Ho had a habit of using abbreviations in daily life. She guessed high color laser might actually be shorthand for HCL. After hearing Yunso's analysis, Kanju checked again and realized Hyun Ho was referring to acid. Immediately, Jin Hyuk carefully scanned the scene and soon spotted several acid bottles placed in dangerous positions. If they fell, the consequences would be catastrophic. Hyun Ho's behavior also made Jin Hyuk realize he didn't dare speak the truth directly. This suggested the mastermind might be lurking somewhere in the bar. Jin Hyuk and Dae Shik quickly split up to take action. Dae Shik took on searching for the suspect, while Jin Hyuk handled drawing their attention. Jin Hyuk glanced forward, signaling Hyun Ho. Catching the hint, Hyun Ho understood instantly. At that moment, Dae Shik spotted a suspicious woman behind the bar counter holding a remote control. Realizing she'd been exposed, she pressed the trigger button without hesitation. In an instant, the acid bottles hanging above began to drop. Luckily, the police had prepared in advance. They swiftly evacuated everyone from the bar, preventing any injuries. Seeing the situation turn against her, the woman shrank back, then bolted, but the police were quick to chase right behind her. Finally, the woman tripped and fell face first to the ground. After the fall, her wig came off, revealing she was actually a man in disguise. Jin Hyuk looked closer and recognized him as a repairman. That day, he'd accidentally dropped his tools and Hyun Ho kindly picked them up for him. This small act sparked an obsession in the man toward Hyun Ho. To get his attention, he dressed as a woman man to enter the bathroom, then gave Hyun-ho a knife, forcing him to cause chaos in the bar. If he refused, the man threatened to splash acid on the girls there. For everyone's safety, Hyun-ho had no choice but to comply. Even after being taken to the police station, the imposter didn't give up. He soon noticed the close bond between Hyun-ho and Eun-soo, fueling his jealousy. While Eun-soo was alone researching files in the basement, he sneaked in. Holding a bottle of acid, he aimed to throw it at her. At the critical moment, Jin Hyuk burst in. Eun-soo acted fast, using the chance to knock the attacker down, causing the acid to splash back onto his own face. The handsome features he once prided himself on were now completely ruined. Elsewhere, a mysterious psychiatric hospital specializing in murders operated in secret. It primarily targeted wanderers and beggars. The director Byun had two bizarre hobbies. One was trafficking human organs for profit. The other was listening to little girls tell fairy tales. That day, the hospital staff were preparing to strike a man, but the victim refused to go quietly and fought back fiercely. When the doctors found him, he was in a panicked state, standing on the stairs, drinking non-stop. Due to carelessness, one doctor was overpowered and taken hostage. The man dragged the doctor to the rooftop, vowing that if he had to die, he'd take the doctor down with him. Then he used the doctor's phone to call the police. Soon after, Jin Hyuk and Dae Shik arrived at the scene. Jin Hyuk tried to persuade the victim and eventually calmed him down a bit, but at that moment, Director Byun quietly ordered his staff to prepare a surprise attack. Luckily, the police reacted swiftly and managed to rescue the man in time. He thrashed wildly, insisting he was the real victim, but the police didn't believe him. To avoid endangering those around, the doctors loaded him onto an ambulance while making excuses to get Jin Hyuk and Dae Shik to leave. However, the man's phone hadn't disconnected yet. This allowed the emergency center to unintentionally overhear the entire conversation. Through this, they uncovered a horrifying truth. The man had escaped from a surgery, even more terrifying to cut costs. The hospital hadn't used anesthesia during the procedure since the patient wasn't expected to survive anyway. Hearing this, Kanju shuddered in horror. She immediately contacted Jin Hyuk and Dae Shik, ordering them to stop the ambulance at once. By then, the man had been taken off the vehicle and was about to be wheeled into surgery again. Using the provided location, Jin Hyuk and Dae Shik soon arrived at a private hospital. At the reception desk, they were told the mentally ill patient was injured and already receiving treatment inside. Seeing the hospital's well-equipped facilities, Jin Hyuk felt somewhat reassured. He glanced into the ward and saw the frantic man still inside with a bracelet on his wrist, the clearest proof of his identity. Yet at that moment, Kanju from the emergency center offered a different theory. Based on the fragmented sounds picked up from the scene, she deduced the man was actually in a wide-open space with loud echoes and the clanking of iron chains. Jin Hyuk rushed into the ward to check, but as he stepped in, he was stunned by the truth. There were no medical devices inside. The patient they'd seen was just a hospital staff member staged to play the part. Kanju speculated that the mentally unstable man had likely been taken back to the operating room already. Upon receiving the alert, Jin Hyuk and Dae Shik rushed back to the scene, but when they arrived, the psychiatric hospital was eerily deserted with not a soul in sight. Dae Shik quickly unlocked the conference room. Inside, over 100 frail and sick elderly people huddled in a corner, moaning in agony non-stop. Despite Jin Hyuk's attempts to question them, they remained silent. Dae Shik suddenly noticed a pile of unidentified drugs in a corner. In that instant, Jin Hyuk pieced it together. These homeless people had been turned into test subjects for experimental drugs. That's why they were in such excruciating pain. A bespectacled man nearby admitted they were forced to take countless drugs every day. Not only did it cause physical torment, but it also triggered hallucinations. While Jin Hyuk and Dae Shik worked to rescue the pitiful victims in the basement, the mentally unstable man was having his abdomen cut open without anesthesia. In unbearable pain, he suddenly thrashed and knocked the doctor over. The phone in his pocket fell to the floor. Only then did they realize the call was still connected. Upstairs, Director Byun began to panic as he heard approaching footsteps. He hurriedly ordered the scene to be cleaned up, preparing to flee. At that moment, Jin Hyuk burst into the room. With just a few moves, he subdued all the culprits. Dae Shik quickly opened a nearby freezer, but the moment he saw what was inside, he broke out in a cold sweat. It held countless fresh human organs meticulously packed in Ziploc bags for preservation. These monsters clearly didn't see the hospital's patients as human. Then Jin Hyuk and Dae Shik rushed to Director Byun's office. There, they found a little girl cowering in a corner. Due to prolonged use of experimental drugs, her lips had turned a sickly purple. With Jin Hyuk's reassurance, she finally let down her guard. She weakly pointed to a bookshelf nearby. Jin Hyuk caught on instantly and moved to pull it aside. Sure enough, a secret passage lay behind it. At that moment, Director Byun suddenly lunged at Jin Hyuk with a knife, but Jin Hyuk reacted swiftly, grabbing the man's wrist. He deliberately slashed a long cut on his own wrist. He knew that if injured injured by the opponent, all his subsequent actions could be deemed self-defense. So he decisively broke the old man's arm, then aimed his gun straight at Hart, letting him taste the brink of death. Just then, a large group of police stormed the scene. Hundreds of captive victims were successfully rescued. In another development, years ago, a boy was given a dog by his father, but that day he coldly killed it simply because its barking annoyed him. Not stopping there, he went on to savagely mutilate the dog's body with a hammer. 30 years later, Mogi Baeom, the father of that boy, stepped into his son's room. When he opened a cabinet, a female corpse wrapped tightly in plastic hit his eyes. Mogi Baeom's entire body trembled. His son still hadn't abandoned his sick passion for killing. Whenever night fell and he couldn't sleep, Motaegu would grab his iron ball and hunt people. As if still unsatisfied with the beast inside, he ordered his men to kidnap poor workers. Then Motaegu would slaughter them to indulge his twisted pleasure. After each kill, he meticulously preserved the victim's hair. He even kept their bodies in his bedroom to talk to them. Lately, since Nam Sang-tae stopped supplying prey, Motaegu's mood grew increasingly irritable. Finally, in a fit of madness, he strangled Nam Sang-tae with a rope. Then, he frantically stabbed Nam Sang-tae's body over and over with a knife. When Jin Hyuk arrived at the scene, all he saw was a corpse. Nam Sang-tae hung limply from a tree. Nearby were numerous recordings. From these materials, Jin Hyuk realized the case of his late wife was tied to many more secrets, and all of it connected back to that murderer. However, the public now fully believed Nam Sang-tae was the culprit behind the serial murders. No one knew the real mastermind was someone else. To cover up his son's crimes, Chairman Mogi Baeom of the tycoon conglomerate personally met with Police Chief Bae. He ordered Bae to halt all related investigations and pin every crime on Nam Sang-tae to keep the case from being dug deeper. As soon as he returned to headquarters, Chief Bae immediately issued an order to suspend Kanju and Jin Hyuk. Upon receiving the notice, both were furious. They stormed straight to Bae's office to confront him. At that moment, Chief Bae was hosting an important guest, none other than Motaegu, the son of Chairman Mogi Baeom. The moment Motaegu spoke, Kanju instantly felt a chill of recognition. She realized in shock that this was the voice of the man who killed her father 3 years ago. That meant the tycoon's son before her was the murderer from back then. Kanju immediately shared her realization with Jin Hyuk. Her eyes burned with resolve, while Jin Hyuk lost all control to rage. He lunged at Motaegu, grabbing his collar tightly, but without solid evidence, Motaegu remained smug. Jin Hyuk drew his gun, his gaze dripping with murderous intent, as if he wanted to shoot his enemy dead on the spot. Yet in contrast to Jin Hyuk's fury, Motaegu merely smirked. He calmly walked out of the station without a hint of fear. On his way back, Motaegu casually pondered who to kill first, recalling 3 years ago he'd once spoken with Kanju over the radio. Her voice back then had thrilled Motaegu. With that in mind, he hatched a new plan. That night, in a state of excitement, he brought a gift box and quietly appeared at Kanju's doorstep. Inside her apartment, Kanju clearly heard each footstep in the hallway. She gripped a knife tightly and edged toward the door. Outside, Motaegu pulled out his iron ball and repeatedly struck the railing, making eerie noises. Sensing danger, Kanju immediately called Jin Hyuk. Through the peephole, she peered out and locked eyes with Killer. Catching her gaze, Motaegu couldn't contain his thrill and burst into gleeful laughter. Kanju braced herself to fling the door open, but just as she turned the knob, he vanished. Not far away, a pink-ribboned gift box sat neatly at the top of the stairs. Hidden in the shadows, Motaegu silently watched her every move. In this perilous moment, Jin Hyuk and 2 officers raced to the scene. When they opened the box, inside was a patch of scalp with hair still attached from a victim. At the same time Motaegu returned to his parked car, he neatly stowed his weapon in a suitcase. With a cryptic smile, he set his next target, Jin Hyuk. Another dark scheme was now in motion. Switching to another scene in South Korea, whenever a bus crashed, the transport company would claim a massive insurance payout. Exploiting this, a group forced drivers to sign high-value insurance contracts, naming the company as the sole beneficiary in case of an accident. Then they deliberately sabotaged tires and tampered with brakes to stage unintended incidents. This time, a new driver had the misfortune of starting work unaware he'd stepped into a preset trap. Today, the company assigned him a special route. At the pickup point, he noticed most passengers were women, children, and pregnant women. As the bus rolled forward, the road ahead grew narrow and rough. Constant jolts made a boy and a pregnant woman unable to hold back from vomiting. The bus shook more violently. Suddenly, a large boulder blocked the road ahead. The driver slammed the brakes in panic, but the bus didn't respond. Realizing the brake system had failed, he frantically turned the wheel to regain control. But at that moment, a loud bang rang out. The pre-damaged tire abruptly burst. The bus spiraled out of control, crashing into the rock and flipping onto its side. In the cramped space, passengers were flung everywhere. Some were crushed under the bus, bus, while others were cut by shattered glass. Everyone plunged into panic. Amid the crisis, the pregnant woman shakily called the police. The command center immediately dispatched rescue and firefighting teams to the scene. But the transport company was prepared. They used road repairs as an excuse to send a construction crew to block the rescue team's only access road. Large rescue vehicles couldn't reach the scene in time. At the same moment Kanju was on duty at the command center, she suddenly heard strange noises through the phone. Analyzing them closely, she detected a gas leak from the bus. It could explode at any moment. Grasping the gravity of the situation, Kanju immediately alerted the nearest police station. She demanded they mobilize all available personnel to clear the traffic jam. Simultaneously, she called Jin Hyuk. She briefed him on the situation, urging him to swiftly neutralize the explosion risk. But conditions inside the bus were already dire. The boy's body temperature was dropping, while the man pinned under the wreckage was fading out of consciousness. 10 minutes later, the rescue team finally reached the site. Everyone worked together to pull the injured out. One by one, victims were loaded onto ambulances. But just as the rescue seemed complete, Kanju caught a faint cry for help from afar. Only then did they realize the driver was still trapped in his seat. Alerted, Jin Hyuk rushed to the driver's side. Yet as he approached, the sound of leaking gas grew louder. The rescue team inspected the bus and found it had no brakes at all. Worse still, the tires were old scrap rubber, soft and far below safety standards. Jin Hyuk pounded on the bus window trying to rouse the driver. Fortunately, after relentless effort, the driver was freed just in time. In that life or death moment, electric sparks began crackling around them. Just seconds later, a massive explosion rocked the bus, engulfing it in flames. All evidence burned to ashes in the inferno. Firefighters rushed in to extinguish the blaze, but everyone at the scene knew this was no ordinary accident. Jin Hyuk held the driver's insurance contract in his hand. A bad feeling crept into his gut. Kanju immediately ordered her team to investigate similar incidents. The findings chilled everyone to the bone. Over the past 10 years, this transport company has faced 256 similar accidents. Insurance payouts totaled hundreds of billions of won, all funneled into the company's pockets. And the one behind it was none other than Chairman Mo-gi Baeom, with his son Mo-tae-gu also involved. Knowing the truth was unraveling, Mo-gi Baeom couldn't stay idle. He immediately contacted his mole in the police force, ordering him to deal with Jin Hyuk and Kanju as soon as possible. But what no one expected was that the mole was none other than Dae-shik, Jin Hyuk's trusted right-hand man. Turned out earlier, Dae-shik's father had caused a serious accident, hitting a pedestrian. Dae-shik, then a police officer, rushed to the scene to check. Upon arriving, he saw several men surrounding the car. As he opened his mouth, they demanded money and threatened to call the police. Dae-shik sternly declared his police status, but they just mocked him and taunted him further. In anger, Dae-shik snatched the phone from one of them. The gangster charged forward to attack. Dae-shik merely gave a light push, not expecting the man's head to slam hard into a rock. Within minutes, he convulsed and died on the spot. Dae-shik was utterly terrified. In just one day, he and his father had unintentionally killed 2 people. But even more shocking, the gangsters didn't pursue charges. Instead, they used the incident to blackmail Dae-shik. Thus, Dae-shik became an unwilling mole. At the police station, he exploited his position to erase all evidence of Mo-tae-gu's crimes while misdirecting Jin Hyuk's investigation. Now Dae-shik was in Mo-gi Baeom's office, receiving his final secret mission, and that mission was to kill his own partner Jin Hyuk. Thanks to task force leader Jang Kyung-ha, Jin Hyuk finally learned the truth. Late that night, he asked Dae-shik to meet at their usual bar. As soon as they sat down, Jin Hyuk filled Dae-shik's glass with liquor. Though confused about what was happening, Dae-shik drank it all. Suddenly Jin Hyuk pulled out his gun. He placed 2 bullets on the table and said in a challenging tone that if Dae-shik wanted to kill him, he should shoot. With that, Jin Hyuk turned and walked away. Dae-shik sat there, tears silently streaming down. He knew he'd betrayed the man he respected. That night, half drunk, Dae-shik left the bar in sorrow. He wandered alone to the riverbank. Just then his phone rang unexpectedly. It was Mo-tae-gu on the line. He set up a meeting with Dae-shik. Though tipsy this time, Dae-shik had no intention of obeying anymore. At the meeting spot, he aimed his gun straight at the killer's head. Though he hated Mo-tae-gu to his core, Dae-shik couldn't muster the courage to pull the trigger. Right then, one of Mo-tae-gu's henchmen crept up from behind. He swung a club hard into Dae-shik's neck. Dae-shik collapsed unconscious on the spot. When he came to, he found himself in Mo-tae-gu's room, a secret place the killer used for murders. The table was covered with iron balls of weight, all sizes, and Dae-shik's fate was no different from the other victims. In another development, Kanju dug into Mo-tae-gu's records. She uncovered that his childhood was deeply strange. As a young boy, Mo-tae-gu lived in a seaside villa. His mother had taken her own life in that very villa, leaving him with severe psychological scars. Recently, Jin Hyuk had been hunting for the place base Motu used for his killings. Kanju theorized the villa might be his secret base. Late at night, the two stealthily broke into the villa. Motu's car was parked right outside in the yard. Fresh bloodstains marked the ground. Following the trail, Kanju and Jin Hyuk entered the bedroom, but found no one there. Meanwhile, in the basement, Motu gripped a nearly 10-kilogram iron ball. He relentlessly pounded Dae-shik, causing him to vomit blood. Dae-shik trembled and cursed Motu, but it only fueled his excitement further. Motu kept torturing until the victim fell silent. Through the surveillance cameras, he spotted Jin Hyuk and Kanju in the living room. Seeing a chance to toy with them, he grew thrilled, unable to suppress a grin. Instantly, he triggered the villa's defense system. All power switches flipped off and electromagnetic signals cut out. As Kanju and Jin Hyuk tried to leave, they realized the doors were locked tight. Now the two were completely trapped inside with no way out. Years ago, a boy returned home and heard odd noises from the basement. Going down, he saw his father and uncle torturing a stranger. In a fit of rage, his father accidentally killed the man. The boy's mother rushed in and quickly hugged her son, trying to cover his eyes. But what terrified her most was the boy's gaze. He wasn't scared, he felt deeply satisfied. 30 years later, that basement had become his playground. Back to the earlier story. Motu often used his favorite iron ball to torture then kill carefully chosen prey. He relished the feeling of holding others' lives in his hands. To heighten the thrill, he sliced a cut into his palm with a knife, then he gripped his weapon with that bleeding hand. The mix of pain and exhilaration drove Motu deeper into his bloodlust, with no end in sight. Before each strike, Motu always asked his victims how they'd like to take the blow. He claimed it was to improve his service. Then, he'd savagely torture his prey until they stopped breathing. At that moment, Jin Hyuk and Kanju were searching for the killer. They were checking the upstairs living room when all the lights suddenly went out. Jin Hyuk and Kanju instantly knew they'd fallen into the enemy's trap. Worse still, all signals in the villa were severed, cutting off any chance to call for backup. Right after a piercing scream echoed, they rushed to investigate. There, Jin Hyuk and Kanju found a woman's body in the bathtub. The villa was littered with corpses, but the cry for help was just a recording from a phone. Motu was merely toying with the two officers. Perhaps growing bored, he picked up his iron ball again to resume torturing his prey. By chance, Kanju caught the sound. She and Jin Hyuk immediately raced to the basement. By then, Dae-shik had been beaten to a bloody pulp. He lay gasping on the floor near death. The moment Jin Hyuk and Kanju arrived, Motu emerged. With one swing of his gun's butt, he knocked Kanju out cold. Then he aimed the barrel at Jin Hyuk. Motu laughed wildly, now more unhinged than ever. Seeing an opening as the killer let his guard down, Jin Hyuk fired. The bullet struck Motu's arm. He recoiled in pain and spun to flee. Jin Hyuk pushed himself to chase close behind. Meanwhile, Kanju disabled the defense system and contacted her team, demanding they arrest Motu at once. On the rooftop, the final showdown unfolded. The two aimed their guns at each other. Motu was now at a disadvantage. At that moment, police sirens blared. The authorities had caught up. Knowing escape was impossible, Motu slowly lowered his gun and raised his hands in surrender. Yet he kept taunting Jin Hyuk, claiming as a tycoon's son he'd be released soon, even if arrested. Due to his injury, Motu was quickly loaded into an ambulance. Mogi-beom, upon hearing the news, immediately called the hospital. Inside the ambulance, a medic carefully revealed his identity to Motu. He was sent by Mogi-beom to rescue his son. Once in the operating room, Motu was wheeled straight to a special area. Two officers stood guard outside. The hospital director quietly slipped a handful of almonds into Motu's mouth, which would help him fake a poisoning. He promised to get Motu out of the scene, then stage a fake medical case to smuggle him away safely. Soon Motu lost consciousness. His body temperature dropped steadily. The director rushed to the police, claiming the prisoner had taken poison to kill himself. The officers checked the body, but found nothing suspicious. As the authorities left helplessly, the director quickly wheeled the body into an elevator. He then used an antidote to revive Motu. While no one was watching, they supported him in a luxury car. An assistant immediately handed over a stack of documents. Per the plan, in less than half an hour, Motu could assume a new identity and escape. Yet even with a chance to survive, he couldn't accept leaving like this. His sole thought was to kill Kanju and Jin Hyuk before departing. Meanwhile, the major crimes unit stormed Mogi-beom's office to arrest him, but as the police burst in, Mogi-beom pulled a gun and shot himself dead on the spot, refusing capture. At that moment, Motu and his assistant reached the harbor, preparing to flee the country. But the harbor had long been surrounded by police. To protect himself, Motu and the assistant hid on a boat. While the assistant was off guard, Motu suddenly grabbed an iron bar and struck him hard, knocking him out instantly. Then Motu stripped off his clothes and dressed the assistant in them. He calmly kicked the body into the sea. Hearing the splash, the police police rushed to surround the area. Based on the clothing and build, they quickly identified the body as Motu. This let him successfully fool the police, escaping right under their noses. Only when the body was recovered did they realize they'd fallen into the killer's trap. After the incident, Kanju faced media interviews. She revealed Motu was truly a psychopath, stressing it all stemmed from his past. According to Kanju, because Motu witnessed killing firsthand as a child, his warped psyche gradually formed, turning him into a cold-blooded murderer. In the end, Motu was just a madman. After speaking, Kanju stared into the camera with a defiant gaze. This provoked Motu, who was watching the news, fueling his rage. That night, as Kanju reached her door and began to unlock it, Motu suddenly appeared. He charged at her like a bloodthirsty assassin. On the rooftop, Motu unleashed all his pent-up fury. He couldn't fathom why Kanju kept opposing him. He roared that he'd only killed her father, yet she branded him a psychopath. Motu also reminded her he'd given her a chance to live, but she didn't value it. As he finished, he raised his knife high, ready to strike Kanju. Yet facing the enemy who killed her father, Kanju showed no fear. She even flashed a sudden smile. From a distance, Jin Hyuk had been lying in wait. Without hesitation, he fired a shot, hitting Motu's hand. It was all part of Jin Hyuk and Kanju's plan. They deliberately provoked Motu to lure him into their trap. Recalling the unforgivable murder of his wife, Jin Hyuk showed no mercy. He fired multiple rounds into Motu's legs. Though wounded, the killer kept a faint smirk, taunting Jin Hyuk relentlessly. Unable to contain his rage, Jin Hyuk pressed the gun to Motu's forehead and pulled the trigger. But the gun was out of bullets. Without a pause, Jin Hyuk drew his knife and slashed it across Motu's throat. But a second later, Jin Hyuk changed his mind. Instead of killing him, he decided to let Motu live, a life worse than death. Soon after, Motu was sent to a psychiatric hospital. By the doctor's orders, he was confined to an empty room. The place felt eerily familiar. It closely resembled the spaces where Motu once tortured and killed his prey. Now the iron door behind him slowly clanged shut. A chilling sound rang in his ears, making his whole body tremble. For the first time in his life as a murderer, Motu felt fear. In moments, countless psychiatric patients emerged from the shadows. The lead doctor stood among them, his eyes brimming with cruelty. They were all deranged patients, clutching knives, rushing to stab him. After 2 hours of chaos, the doctor stepped forward. At his appearance, the patients instantly retreated. He smiled and used Motu's own familiar method to end his life. The wicked always meet a painful end. With the case closed, the tycoon's accomplices faced harsh punishment. As for Kanju, she returned to the command center and resumed her work. Yet it seems the story's far from over. A hidden secret still lurks. Guilt and shadowy forces persist. Will Kanju and Golden Time crack the next cases? Stay tuned for the next part. For now, goodbye, and see you soon.